Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Buckinghamshire History Festival event. I am overjoyed to be joined tonight by Kate Charlesworth and Sue Shave, but before I introduce them properly, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions that pops into your head as Sue and Kate are chatting, if you could pop them in the Q&A and I shall pop them to them at the end. Now, I want to give you a little bit of context as to why we're sitting together tonight and listening to Sue and Kate. I was given this book by my other half at around Christmas time last year, as he knew I had a long-standing connection and interest with the LGBTQ community and its history. And about that same time, I was wrangling with starting to program the History Festival this year, which is 4 weeks of talks like this. And I really wanted to include some representation of LGBTQ+ history from within the borders of Buckinghamshire. And we have managed to do that with one of our previous talks by Wendy Moore about the two wonderful doctors, Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson. But that's where it begins and ends at the moment in terms of my knowledge of LGBTQ history in Buckinghamshire, and that's really not good enough. There are so many reasons why these histories are hidden and hard to uncover. But I'm a nosy archivist, and when I can't find these histories, I decide that I will pull them in from elsewhere. And so I reached out to Kate after eventually getting my hands on this book from my husband, who, whilst he gave it to me, then kept it and read it. And I reached out to Kate, and she has been absolutely charming in agreeing to be part of the festival and to talk tonight to Sue. Now, Kate is an illustrator and graphic novelist, and she is originally from Barnsley, and she now lives and works in Edinburgh. And Sue Shave is one of the top cultural leaders in Bucks, and she is currently director of Discover Buckinghamshire Museum. So I'm going to hand over to Sue.
Thank you, Catherine, for those wonderful introductions, and it is an absolute privilege and an honour to be invited to converse with the wonderful Kate Charlesworth tonight. I just want to start before we do. We're very, very pleased to see, or not really see you all, but to have you all with us. We'd like to just ask you a couple of questions and make you do a bit of work just before you get the privilege of listening to Kate, if that's okay. So what I'm hoping is that we can just learn a little bit about how many people there are, not just watching, but also how many of you there are on each call, as it were. So if you're watching on your own, if you're watching with other people, if you could vote now, that would be very helpful indeed. Thank you very much. That's great. I can even show you what the results are. It keeps changing. We're not quite sure, but okay. That's one. Okay, plus one is 17%. Okay, that's great. Okay, so that, thank you very much, everybody. And if you really want to see, there we go. Hopefully that is now visible to everybody. And then the next question is just to tell us a little bit about you. And that's really to know a bit about the interests of the audience watching. Do you self-identify? Oh, right, okay. Well, I'm sure you can probably guess the answer to the, oh, no, here we go. There we go. That is fantastic. So it's wonderful to have lots of different kinds of people watching tonight, because this is going to be brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that. That's great. We will stop doing polls now. Okay, so one of the phrases from this wonderful book of Kate's really took me back to when I used to go on the London Pride March. It's been quite a few years since I've been on, but we all used to shout, didn't we? We're here, we're queer, we're not going shopping. Yeah, that was one of them, wasn't it, Kate? That was one of many ones, but I remember shouting that with my then girlfriend. So Kate, there's this it's been such a privilege to read a graphic novel. I think, you know, we've talked before about people not being familiar with this genre, but your book covers so many things, so many themes I hope we might just touch upon tonight, including the sort of coming out multiple times to lots of people, as the book title suggests, the way we self-identify ourselves through dress and shoes and the way other people see us, and relationships, and how we how people relate, and from the straight world, and so on. So there's all sorts of things, but let's start with why you thought it was so important to write this book, and a little bit about your process in doing so.
Okay, well, I came out in 1971, which is years ago, but doesn't seem that long ago to me. But when I came out, it was a funny time. It was kind of a changeover time, and the old world of the 1950s and 60s, when you still had lesbians in, gents' natty suitings and Brill cream and very butch femme, and then the younger ones who, glam rock was quite the thing at the time, and they were wearing satin and twinkly things, and so the younger dykes were mimicking straight male fashion, which was starting to become a bit peacocky, and the bands and all the rest, and the hair turned under, and the Rod Stewart lookalikes. Oh yes, and good ones too. And I thought, this is interesting. That look, this is, I could see time passing in front of my eyes in a way. And I suppose I was on that scene for 3 or 4 years. I was at Art College in Manchester, and I hung around for a few 2 or 3 years after that. And it did change, and I thought, this is really important. And I was aware that, of course, Oscar Wilde and Radcliffe Hall, I knew that we were part of a continuum. And I thought, who's going to know about this? If people didn't take photographs in the way that we all do compulsively these days. I have very few photographs in those days, but there were a few. And so I carried this thought with me for years. And so it was kind of the late 90s, I thought, and I've been involved in making comics, indie comics by then, and I've done cartoon strips in the gay press, and New Scientist magazine and the Guardian, and I thought, I have to do something. There should be a huge book. There's a huge book with everything in it, everything. And I thought, okay, I can draw. I'm going to have to do it. If that original thought had taken place and had happened, the book would be about that thick, and I'd still be working on it. It would just be a massive doorstop. Anyway, I took the idea to Myriad Editions publishers, and the fabulous Corinne Perlman, their creative director, whom I knew anyway a bit. She took it under her wing and said, well, this is great, but we can't publish a brick. And so gradually took it down to the 320 pages worth that it is now. And so I thought, we need a record, because I was forgetting stuff. Everybody forgets stuff. I mean, I've had people come up to me since it was published saying, oh God, that's my story. And people have said, I was there in the 60s. My period was the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 21st century, I thought, bloody hell, it has worked. Mm-hmm. So it's for younger people will know what happened, and older ones, like me, won't forget. If I'm in the home one day, somebody says, look, this is you. Is it? Well, fancy that. Terrible person I was. And so it's, once I had the idea, I had to do it. I mean, I was utterly compelled to do it. And I'm glad I did. I used to worry that I'd, drop off the perch before it was finished, but I didn't, and it was.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about being queer in Barnsley, very, very early on in your life. But what was that like, and what sort of parallels are there today?
Well, I suppose I wasn't very queer in Barnsley because I grew up, when I say in Barnsley, it's actually, Barnsley is a big area. And when I was a child, small child, I grew up in a village called Dartmouth, which was semi-rural, actually. And, you know, I was the only kid in the road, apart, alone, only gay in the village. I mean, I did have my little friend across the road, and we did play naughty little games, which my mother found out about, and it didn't go well.
That was in the book as well, wasn't it?
It is in the book, and I learned from that, and I must have been, oh, I don't know, about 6 or 7 in the 1950s, that people don't like this sort of thing. You know, there's utterly natural instinct. It might have been little boys, but it was little girls. Actually, it was always little girls. I wasn't so bothered about the little boys. And I wanted their stuff, mind you. That's what I wanted. I wanted their stuff, but they could just leave it and I'd go. Yeah. Anyway, so I learned very early on that this is forbidden and you should feel very guilty about it. And it was bad, but it never went away. But later on, I was in a smaller town near Barnsley where my family came from. And again, it wasn't exactly semi-rural, but I spent lots of times, you know, roaming around the canals and the woods and all the rest of it. And as a teenager, I knew that I was different. I realized eventually that I probably was a lesbian, you know. Oh, that horrible word, you know, awful, awful. And then I thought, well, what do I do about that? Because I didn't actually fancy anybody, anything, you know, man, woman, no beast. And I thought, I'll research it. I research it. Now, I was a bookish child. And so I read lots of Colette. And I was also a pretentious child, probably. And I took the sort of sixth former's subscription to the Sunday Times. And in one issue, it must have been about the time that the partial decriminalisation came in 68, when I would have been 18 or 17 or 18. It was that time, and it said there was a list of famous homosexuals who were out, and there was David Hockney, possibly another couple of blokes, but and Maureen Duffy was the only out lesbian in the entire country that the press could print about. And I thought, wow. And it also, this article also told of a lesbian magazine that was being published. And I remembered the name. I didn't do anything about it, but I remembered the name. And so as a proto Baby Dyke, you look around for hints and clues of who might be like you. There was a woman called Nancy Spain, who's a journalist, and in her day, a celebrity journalist in the 1950s and early 60s. She'd have been she'd probably been an influencer or something now. She'd have been all over everything, as she was at the time. And she was plainly a dyke on the telly. She had it written into her contract, I was told by someone who knew her, that she would only appear if she wore a man's shirt and chunky jumper, trousers too, but it was only from the waist up, you know, it's black and white. And I found out later on that, like me, there were queer people of all sorts, men, women, trans, saw Nancy Spain and went, I am not alone. I am not alone. And it's just a terrible old thing, really, but it's very piratical. And so she was very important to so many people, including me.
That's, you know, the only gay in the village, you know, that's, I think, you know, lots of us have and still have that experience. You know, yes. I know very few other lesbians, and certainly none that, you know, that I see on a regular basis. And, you know, you are always, if you're LGBTQ, you know, whatever area of the spectrum that you're from, or maybe you're, you know, a range of, you're still looking for people like you. And
Yeah.
early on, when people, you know, were less able to be out, that must have been, you know, a very difficult time.
It was, and really the only way you could, it was really the heroes were the Butch Dykes, because they were the ones who were either probably compelled because they couldn't stand to wearing frocks and all the rest of it, but they were the ones who stood out. They were the only ones you knew were probably not as other women, and they were very brave to do that. And of course there were, and so I mean, of course, loads of people left the country and the small villages and the small towns and went to London and Manchester, big cities. I did, you know, I went to art school in Manchester, then to London, and now I'm in Edinburgh, but I have lived in the country, and it's all right, it's in Scotland. And but I was kind of up and running by then, and it was just different. But I always looked at the feet, actually. In the end, I realized in the 70s when I had come out, it's not like this now, but at the time, no matter what they were wearing, you know, what sort of frocks and things they were wearing, if you looked at the feet, they quite often wore, the footwear was a bit of a giveaway, semi-sensible perhaps. And, you know, when trouser suits came in, if they were wearing stiletto, pointy shoes, girly shoes, forget it. If they were wearing shoes, yeah, well, yeah, maybe. And then there was sometimes a little spark of recognition, which I wasn't actually, but it did happen.
Yeah, the spark of recognition. I think we all, you know, recognize that one, that, you know, there's that sort of something passes between you and another person, and you don't, you know, you might not ever speak to them again or even ever see them again in your life, but the spark of recognition is very important, isn't it?
And that could happen anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And of course it did. As you say, it was even just that little kind of, not even being cruised, as it were, but just that little look was could carry you through quite a while, quite a long way. Yeah.
And the whole coming out, I mean, you talk about that a lot, or picture about that a lot in your book, about, you know, it isn't just once, it's you know, every single time you know, go to a new job, you make new friends, you know, you go any new situation that you find yourself in, that, you know, your pronouns, your, you know, the way that you talk about the person that you're with, all of those sorts of things, you know, even now is something that, you know, we all are dealing with if you're LGBTQ. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's been for you?
Well, it's a lifelong work in progress, because, you know, the great importance of coming out, and everybody says, oh, do it, you know, you'll feel so much better, you'll be your true self. And it's true. I mean, not to come out would be awful. And it was awful for so many people who felt they could not, and some people still cannot. But what you don't realize is that it's a continual process, you know. And I actually, you know, I mean, obviously to your parents, friends, employers, people, you know, next door neighbors, anybody, you know, blokes who chat you up, do you go, oh, you know, I'll just shrug them off, or say, I'm a lesbian, actually. And I did do that sometimes. If I judged it to be a safe situation, I was signing on as a student, which is a wicked thing to do, but we did do it back then. I remember coming out of the Dole office, and and I smiled at this guy, because he looked like it was a black guy, actually, and he looked studenty. It wasn't local. And he thought that was a come on from me. And he started chatting me up, and I said, I'm so sorry, you misunderstood me. And I said, I'm a lesbian, I don't like men. Now, it was a bit naive of me, but he was so angry. He said, I'd no right to lead men on like that, you know. And it was an evil thing. For bloody hell. I'll be a bit more careful about, you know, distributing my largesse in future. And yeah, you just it happens constantly. And one of my worries, actually, I mean, for all the changes we've had in our societies, what happens when we get old? You know, do we spend a lifetime coming out and have to go back in again? A lot of people have had to do that. They really have, you know, and if they're lucky, they get nice young men and young women who are queer themselves as carers. And if not, there'll be, you know, these old butchers, imagine, stuck in a corner in frilly 90 or something, because that can happen. And,
yes, I think there's something in the kind of heroes that you talk about in your book, in terms of the huge importance of people having role models that you know,
yeah.
that all the way through. I mean, all the decades that your book goes through, and you know that each of them you actually pick men and women, and you know lots of different kinds of experiences out. But I think that's, you know, I know, you know, colleagues who say to me, it's just really important now that, you know, if you know, if you're, I mean, I work in a museum, and it's really important for museums to be telling the stories of people who are marginalized and underrepresented, and you know, for the director of a museum to be out and, you know, clearly of a community that is underrepresented in the museum, and we're trying to do a lot to address that, so that when people come to the museum and feel that this is a place they can come and tell their stories, that, you know, it's they do see themselves. But you know, people are really, even now, still having role models and people who can stand up, you know, footballers who can be gay, and you know, it shouldn't be a thing. It shouldn't be something we've got to worry about. But tell me about your heroes and how they perhaps influenced you.
Well, apart from old Nancy, who tragically died quite young with her lover in a plane crash on the way to cover the Grand National in Liverpool. I don't actually remember that. I would only have been about 13 or 14. She just sort of disappeared from my orbit. But I knew, somehow or other, when I was a teenager, I knew that Dusty Springfield was supposed to be a dyke. I think there must have been after she'd had said something in an interview, and then kind of hoped that the waters would close back over again. But it penetrated that rumor, which is absolutely true, penetrated my shed, actually, which is where I spent most of my time, in, you know, in the backwaters of a town near Barnsley. Dusty Springfield, but how? Why do I know that? You know, and indeed she was, and that was thrilling. That was another case. I mean, she was adored by men and women. Was also an absolute favourite for drag queens to do impersonations on, because she looked like a drag queen. You know, she wore sparkly frocks, and there were wigs, always wigs. She was a tiny woman, actually, as blind as a bat. And she was a strongly boned face, you know, and she had a dread of being thought of as a great big butch lady. And I think it was only in her last years that she could probably relax, which was such a tragedy, because she could have had a fantastic life. However, it was always easier for men to come out, even when it was difficult, than for women to come out. A woman who might come out would have just been, she would have lost her career. You know, there was a quite well-known pop singer, woman singer at the time. Can't remember her name, but she was quite busty and strong, but very feminine. And she came out as bisexual, and you practically never heard about her again after that. She went into show, you know, stage stuff. But that was her career shafted. But it was okay for David Bowie and Elton John in there. And I mean, and Bowie sort of came out, went back in again, came out a bit, went, oh, fuck it. And so those sorts of heroes were very important. And there always had been heroes. I mean, I'm going to show you this thing. Not always heroes for everybody, but these were two never exactly out, but not really, in lesbians from the 19th century in Wales. And they're the ladies of Llangollen.
Oh, yes.
There were two aristocratic women, Irish women actually, who, to escape marriage, fled to England and set up house together. And they were this is a bit of this is a tea bowl, 19th century printed ware tea bowl, and they were so famous they made pottery, commemorative pottery about them, featuring them, flat back figures for the mantelpiece, and famous people of the day, writers and politicians dropped in on them. It was an extraordinary, I mean, it was an absolute anomaly, but they were there. And I'm sure for at least upper and middle class women at the time, they were touchstones as well. The ladies of Llangollen, the honourable thingy Ponsonby and and then there were other, not exactly, well, there were role models actually, but probably weren't lesbians, but who knows what might have happened to people like Vesta Tilley, who was a male impersonator.
Yeah.
And I found that postcard of her in our local flea market in Leith. And I like this very, I mean, she was very dismissive about lesbians because they obviously worshipped her, but women were a huge number of her following. She dressed as a young man immaculately, really immaculately. Dandies copied her. They copied her outfits, and this is it. She's in a mess kit here, and army mess kit, and she did sailors and everything. And this one here is to a man to Stanley Forster Esquire in Southport, and it's dated 21st of February the 21st, 1902. And this one is from a woman who says, "Have you this one of Vesta? I think her perfect, Maud." And I thought, wow, I think they're perfect. And they did. And so women like this, whether they were closeted saphists or not, would have been absolute heartthrobs and heroines for people, women watching them, and for gay men too. There was always that, it's one of ours up there. And one of my, anyway, so in the 70s, I used to cartoons and layout and stuff for a magazine called Sappho, which took over from this other magazine, which I'd heard about in the Sunday Times, called Arena 3. And I would just say that these magazines went all over the country, into the depths of the countryside, in plain envelopes. And they had, you could write to people, you could meet people through the magazine. It wasn't.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I joined up actually, and I wrote to one or two women. I never met anybody, but people, there's mailing lists, and that's members only. And anyway, one of Sappho magazine, which kind of grew out of Arena 3 when that went, in the 70s, was edited by a woman called Jackie Forster, who herself, like Nancy, and she knew Nancy, but before she came out, which is her eternal regret, she also had worked on television and had been quite well known in the 50s, but eventually realised that she was a lesbian and divorced her husband, or maybe, well, they'd split up anyway. She kept his name, Forster. And she said, I became rent-a-dyke. She was about the only woman in the country who would appear on live television, wrote reams of things in the press, edited the magazine, and came out, joined the group CHE, the Committee for Homosexual Equality, and came out at Speaker's Corner in London on the CHE stall, you know, where people, anybody can stand on their hind legs and talk to people who want to listen. And she stood up there and said, "You are looking at a raging dyke."
Right back at you, yeah.
Yeah, and she never looked back, and was absolutely out from that moment. And she was a brave woman, a very brave woman. Yeah,
I think there's something about that, isn't there? You know, that even, you know, to people have horrendous experiences, and you know, today, and
yeah,
that to come out when there's hardly anybody that you know about, and you know you're going to suffer, you know, the sort of appalling experiences. You talked about what the first MP who came out, and you know how badly she was treated by her party, and
Maureen,
you know, that
Maureen Colquhoun,
yes,
who has only just died actually. When she left,
really?
when she left London, she went to the Lake District and I think became a councillor and gave them laldy. So she actually did go. She retreated to the countryside, I think with her partner, and I think she must have been over 100, 101. I think Maureen. She was a force of nature. Yeah,
She must have been. I'm still reeling about Cressida Dick. I think that's that's amazing. Missed that one, but yeah. So yes, heroes. I think. And also, I'm very impressed with the GNS link. I have to say, I'm a GNS fan. Conducted the Mikado when I was at college, which was umpty years ago, quite a long time ago. And I loved the operas that you did, and some of the lyrics, which I just reread some of them tonight. Actually, extraordinary. Trying to work out the tunes in my head.
Yeah.
How did all that come about then?
Well, I think actually GNS fans are should be a protected species.
I think we are.
Well, it came about actually by you know, there's a teacher at school who kind of introduced us to it, and I thought, oh, that's good. And I what I really liked, because the music's actually great, people rubbish it, but it's cheery, and
it is.
But what I really liked were the rhyming schemes. Where Gilbert was a very, very, very good wordsmith, and people like Noel Coward and Stephen Sondheim have cited him as a great influence, because he was, I mean, some of the plots are pretty hokey and they're terrible jokes, but he was a fantastic wordsmith and rhymer, and it just struck a chord, and I thought this was great. And my straight pal Ollie, she liked it too, and we used to go all over the place to see the D'Oyly Cart, which was this company who performed these operas. They're sort of disbanded now as a company, but they're still a presence. And I got to know people in the company, backstage crew, and occasionally some of the singers, and I realized that it was a kind of traveling family. And I think because I knew I was other, I wasn't part of the straight world, and there were quite a few gay men in the company, and I became pretty good friends with one of them. It was nice, and I think it became a kind of substitute for a social life that the kids at our school were having, you know, getting off with each other and doing teenage things, which I hated, you know, just couldn't do all of that. And so I just trundled around after this bunch who put Gilbert and Sullivan operas on, and it was harmless. And I got snuck backstage in many a theatre, which was very thrilling. And I liked theatre. I liked the idea of theatre, and I was kind of backstage struck. I never wanted to be in it really, but I liked the vibe about it. Yeah. And so when it came to the book, I think it was Corinne actually. She said, "Oh, are you going to do? Is it going to be a Gilbert and Sullivan opera book? And I said, no, of course it's not. And she said, oh, go on, or something like that. You know, and I thought, well, it was actually important. And I did. And when I came to write the story, I thought, actually, it was very important that I met some of those people. You know, my first gay male friend, actually, who was Campus Cleo. And it's a funny one. And anyway, and it was also at the time when I was coming out that the Doily Cart used to come to Manchester, and I've been nipping down there. A lot of them, of course, a lot of them drank in the gay bars, and you'd see them a bit around the place. And so I thought, okay, I'll make. I was used to like doing pastiches, so I've pastiched a lot of the lyrics, and you can sing along to them. It does say which song it is on the page.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also realized that, well, I knew that pastiche is a very good way. If you have a form like a Gilbert and Sullivan lyric, they're quite, or Gilbert's lyric, they're quite often list songs, the patter songs, and they're lists of things. And that's a really good way of getting an awful lot of information over in a short space. When you're not saying, oh, she said this and he said that, or the different, and so you can just get this bonkers scheme of somebody singing it all with humor, and also talking about really some quite difficult things like the lesbian sex wars of the 1980s, which were horrible, you know, not unlike some of the crap that's flying around now. It's basically the thought police telling you how to live your life, what you could do, what you couldn't do. It all fizzled away eventually, and something else arose. But it was a very, very useful device. I'm very fond of it.
You mentioned there about the rules, and you know, we started to talk a little bit about, you know, roles within relationships and how. And I'm sure, you know, this applies to not just to lesbians, but, you know, in relationships, you know, the who's the man question, and, you know, people taking on what was kind of, you know, how heterosexual relationships looked, because there was no way of, you know, there wasn't anything to compare with. Do you think that's changed in the way that, you know, people view themselves in relationships, and other people view lesbian relationships, and indeed, you know, any LGBTQ relationship?
I tell you what, I actually think that people secretly think, who's the man? But no, they can't say that anymore.
If you're not a butch dyke, then it's not obvious. Well, if you're a lipstick lesbian, yeah, that confuses people.
Absolutely. And way back when I was a baby dyke and I came out and I was learning these bloody rules, it was dreadful. They were very rigid. There's one woman. There were two women. Most of them used it, this dog rough club that we all used to go to. That's all there was, you know. It's very exciting. Loved it. And these two women who both had long hair, just very nice women. And this woman said, look at those two over there. They're students. She said, bread on bread. And what she meant was, they're not butch and femme. And she was very disparaging of this. And I mean, she was, it was like a queer version of a heterosexual comment, you know, oh, who does what to who, you know. And I thought, well, it sounds all right to me, you know, why not?
Yeah.
But again, that was changing times. They were coming out of this very rigid butch and femme world, and things were starting to change, and they changed and changed and changed until they just mushroomed, you know, in the last 20 years, I suppose, really, because it's not been that long ago. It really hasn't. Yeah.
No, that question about the scene as well and how that's changed, which is, you know, slightly kind of moving on from relationships, yeah, and you know, rules that we set ourselves and police ourselves. I mean, that, you know, that I remember, you know, sort of you'd see that spark of recognition thing, but then you'd also get a bit of aggression sometimes. You know, other dykes would look at you, and you'd know that, you know, they were other dykes, but they would be quite aggressive towards you. Yeah, actually, you should be overjoyed to meet somebody who's just like you, but oh no, you know, it was just somehow there was something.
Yeah,
this was probably, you know, 80s or 90s. I'm remembering this, but you know, I used to sort of experience a bit of this, and I absolutely bewildered that there could even be, you know, within our circles, that people would not be, you know, welcoming you with open arms and accepting you for what you were, and still having to create rules and constructs for ourselves.
It's plus a change. I mean, you've got human beings involved, and you know, passions run high. I think there are different. I think there are differences between how queer men and queer women socialize. You know, still, I think men are much more chilled about who they have sex with, and women do tend to pair up and bond. So when you get the threat, sometimes when there's a threat of, or perceived threat of somebody else, you know, some little hello sky, hello trees, you know, type going, hello, you look nice, who are you? That's my wife, that is. Yeah, oh, you know, I got that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lesson learned. Oh.
And do you think the scene itself has changed? Because I remember, I mean, I didn't always know that I was a lesbian, and so it was sort of in my early 20s that I began to realise that, you know, I was attracted to other women. And when I was in York at that time, I went to university there, and we used to go to guppies. Anybody, you know, watching, if you've ever lived in York, and you know, we were in York a few hundred years ago, there you might remember guppies. It was an upstairs floor, and it was a kind of nightclub, but you know, was run solely for women, in inverted commas. It wasn't a lesbian, you know, dive. It was for women. It was a women's disco, and you know, that's what we had. And then, you know, if you kind of fast forward to today, you know, places like Pink's aren't really around, and there are some clubs, but you know, there aren't very many bars. You know, has the scene changed, do you think? Is it still the same?
It's practically disappeared. I mean, for women, there will always be men's bars. They just will. I mean, men have always had more spending power. More of them are out because, you know, a lot of women had families and had babies and had responsibilities. Maybe they were carers, are carers. And also when women got into long-term relationships, they tended not to go out very much. So there were never as many women, lesbians, dykes around as ever there were men. And so, and now in these straight and financial times, there aren't enough of us to be catered for. I mean, I live in Edinburgh, and I mean, I've not been out to a bar for a long time, but I don't know anywhere specifically for women in Edinburgh, which is awful, actually. I think it's really awful. Some younger friends of mine, they don't go out anymore because they're paired up. They say, well, you know, we just go to bars with our friends, you know, gay, straight, whatever. And I thought, well, that's great in one way, and it really is wonderful that younger people are much more integrated and chilled and not so judgmental. On the other hand, you could have fabulous times in those places, and it was certainly nice not to be lurked at by heterosexual men. You know, the places were a magnet for some guys trying to get in. So yeah, it has changed massively.
So it sounds as though, Catherine, we need some more events in our museums and archives and institutions around Aylesbury and the whole of Buckinghamshire.
Definitely. I hate to butt in, ladies. I was just going to ask our audience if anyone had any questions for Kate or for Sue, to pop them in the chat. And meanwhile, while people are busily typing.
Mm.
I've got a question, Kate.
Okay, doke.
And I don't know why it's only just struck me, because really it's the question I should have had before I even emailed you. How much of this history, the span, the arc that you cover so well in your book, how much of that is in people's heads? When I'm looking to archive your story, your lived experience, am I just going out and collecting testimonies like yours, oral history, or are there documents, are there publications, is there a written archive, do you think, photographs?
Well, but there are archives. I was talking to a friend of mine today who was the London Metropolitan Archive, and she made sure that there was a good holding of LGBTQ documents. But there's the Bishopsgate Institute, which has loads of stuff. Glasgow Women's Library in Glasgow is excellent. And I think there's a feminist history group or feminist archive. I'm not so sure about them, but there certainly are places. Islington Libraries is very good. Some years ago in Edinburgh, we had the very first ever ordered up by the council, which was great, oral history, queer oral history project. And that was to collect stories and interviews, but, a nice exhibition came of it, and lots of ephemera arose, and that went into the city archives. So, more and more things like that are being done. But I did want the book. I really hope that book, because okay, it's my story, I just happened to be there. And me and some other cartoonists, David Jensen, Kath Jackson, we'd accidentally documented a lot of queer history, and we worked in the gay press, like Sappho magazine and Gay News and the Pink Paper and all sorts of other things. And so my book was sort of building on a lot of that, because we were observers. We took part. Everybody I knew took part. We went on marches because we had to, especially Section 28. That's a postcard I did at the time called "Abseil Makes the Heart Grow Fonder," and it's commemorating the event when a handful of lesbians abseiled into the House of Lords on the night that hideous Section 28 went into law. And they were brave girls, women. They were heroines. Bloody hell. And there were tough times. And so, we are all bits of mosaics. We're all part of the great mosaic of this constant history, and we all have little chunks of stories to tell. There might be somebody might write a novel. Miss Sarah Waters has wrote lots of queer themed novels, and people are writing much more memoir now. And I really did hope, which has happened to a degree actually, that my book would inspire people to start putting their own memories down, because a lot of the things I've included in the book, they're just mentions. You said, oh, Cressida Dick was a dyke. Well, she isn't. She's always been out about it. But, it was really hard to find much LGBTQ Black, for instance, people of colour information, images. It's there, but there's not much of it because queer Black people were doubly, under the cosh from society. So now those stories are being told. Lady Phil in London is fantastic, and so much. And she's initiated a Black Pride and many other things. And so those stories are being told now. So I'm hoping that this book will get to people who are not part of any of those networks, maybe, or aren't, weren't just lived in the city, lived in the small town, but still had incidents, they might just have a postcard, or somebody might have found a postcard or a letter. And I thought, my God, this is somebody's love letter from, and lodge it with a museum, lodge it with an archive.
I wonder, as a kind of follow-up question, you have clearly always recognised the value of your lived experience, that you're living through history and making history. You wanted to write this book from quite an early point, but do you think there's a feeling that a lot of people don't value the history and the postcards and the love letters that they've created, maybe, and it's important for museums and archives to say, actually, this is a really important story?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many important stories, and it's more important than I can say that, we do hang on to things. I mean, my mother used to say, "Oh, you can't keep everything, Catherine," and so she didn't keep anything, and so I've great gaps. Well, she did keep a few things, but a lot was chucked out, and actually I hoard a bit. I mean, you might be able to tell from the stuff around about, but I did keep a lot because I knew I was going to do something with it, and I did, actually. So a lot of my stuff is going to Glasgow Women's Library quite soon, I hope, and because I need a bit more floor space. But also it's our emails and all the different platforms we have. I mean, people are training up now. They will be able to get into old but read emails that aren't accessible anymore, and all this. Every time there's new technology, that has to be kept up as well. There must be ancient floppy disk readers that
So it's my nightmare. It's my nightmare. We've had a few questions from the audience. So first of all, what did you think of the BBC's Gentleman Jack?
I thought it was a rollicking romp. my choir was singing the theme tune, and I have to say it's fantastic. It's the best thing we've sung in years.
It's one of the best theme tunes I think they've ever had. I'm still singing it too. Well,
it's gone to the second series, and that's extraordinary, actually, because the other visitors were charging through
Shibden Hall.
Clibden Hall, and the National Trust. They must have tramped it underfoot. They had nearly 500,000 visitors going through it because of that. And I mean, she was a terrible woman, actually. It's ghastly, but she was brave and upfront and so bold. God knows what sort of spectrums she was on, but but again, like probably around about this, probably operating around about the same time, or maybe a bit earlier, the ladies of Llangollen, but in quite a different manner. And Yorkshire too, hurrah, where I come from.
Okie dokie. Another question from an anonymous attendee. What was the hardest part of Sensible Footwear to write, and what was the easiest?
Well, drawing my father's death was not easy. That was hard, because when you do something like this, when I was drawing my sections of my life story, and because they're drawn, they're actually drawings, and it's not writing down text, and they're quite realistic drawings. I wanted them to have a kind of veracity. In fact, I wanted the whole thing to have layers of veracity. For me, part of that was drawings that are actually quite like people. And so you actually have to act these things out. So, when my mother was being horrible to me, I actually looked quite like her. So, it's quite easy. I had to act it myself, so I could draw that. I had mirrors around the place. You can get profiles and full face. And so thinking back how my dad was and drawing, he was a lovely guy, and that was pretty hard. But actually, in a way, the hardest part was when I drew myself being berated by my mother for being discovered playing naughty games with my little friend. If she'd been able to say, well, that's actually because the child's mother, the kid told her mother, and it was that thing of being exposed. So my mother was so angry because somebody else knew about it. But if she could have maybe just said, oh, I just said, kids, what do you expect? Kids, and it would have probably gone, dissipated. But it wasn't, and I realised, not quite at the time, but I realised that when I looked at it again, and I was quite shocked. I thought, I actually drew the moment that I lost innocence was lost, and guilt, actual guilt arrived, proper guilt that you cart around forever in some form or other arrived. That's quite hard. The easiest stuff, I mean, the Gilbert and Sullivan stuff was great because that was just a big laugh doing. I mean, it's good. It's it's accurate, but I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed drawing things like there's a big double-page spread of drag, people in drag, drag through history, including this very image, of course. And it took quite a while, but I loved doing it. It was absolutely no hardship to do that spread. Yeah.
Okay, moving on, Gloria asks, are today's so-called culture wars just a continuation of how it's always been? It seems to me that there's a lot of divide and conquer going on.
Well, we were talking a while ago about thought police and, what one bunch telling other people how they should be. And I thought the other day, actually, I think something like this happens about every so often, and there's a whole new rumpus starts up, and these things just come up and it's almost like the waves that rise and fall. Either everybody gets used to it, or they can't be asked, or something changes, and then something else will come along. But I think today, I mean, if we had had the internet back then, it would have been horrible. I mean, it was bad enough, but it would have become much more personal and divisive. And I think the culture wars of today, I think it's tragic, really, because the rise of the right is lapping, the right wing are lapping this up. They're fueling it as well. To some degree, quite a lot. They're sitting back and saying, "Go on, fight among yourselves," and that's my great worry. That later on, if it all sorts itself out, which I hope it does with utterly, and everybody can live their lives as we all want to do, just get on with our lives. We were being told, oh, you can't be a lesbian. Lesbian mothers, these women should be shot, get rid of these babies, AID babies. It's bloody industry in it now, full page glossy magazine ads in Diva magazine for sperm donors. Then it was awful. These women were threatened with exposure in the papers, and terrible. And things have really changed on that front, and it's now really quite normal. It's not a big deal, and I hope that people of all genders and sexualities can just live. Not to mention ethnicities, just get on with their lives, which is what pretty much everybody, unless they're nutters, want to do.
I think
it's interesting because my partner and I had a son, and he's by donor insemination, and he's now got 3 mothers, 3 lesbian mothers, and he and I were talking yesterday about whether he felt that the lack of a father figure had impacted on him and how, you know, how his sort of upbringing had affected him. He felt that he was very comfortable around women. He has lots of female friends, as well as girlfriends, of which there seems to have been quite a lot. But you know, he didn't feel he'd had some strong male relationships and role models in his life. But you know, it's something that you know, people, if you know, some people still don't find that acceptable, and others do. And I think that's you know, the war we're fighting, in terms of it shouldn't be, you know, it shouldn't be something that we're all having to worry about. That is a choice that you can make, and you can do that, and that it shouldn't be something that you have to fight other people about, to have the right to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to destroy the family, the fabric of society. It just makes it more intricate and interesting, you know. There's a couple of guys around the corner from us here. They've adopted one child, and now they've got 2 little boys now, and they're French, so their kids are growing up bilingual, and they're very lovely.
Fantastic.
Wish I wouldn't keep bothering my dog though. It's Sally. No, keep away, keep away. She's good.
Say it a bit louder.
They're lovely kids. Really.
I think it's also important to say that books such as yours, Kate, they're really powerful because they're a tool in empathy. And if there's anything that's going to break down barriers and stop prejudice or misunderstanding, it's understanding and empathy, isn't it? So we need to get your book out into as many hands as possible. Okay, so we've got another question. I think this is our final question, unless anyone's got any more, from Phoebe. And this is more for you, Sue. Phoebe asks, could you tell us more about what Bucks Museum is doing to capture, represent, exhibit LGBTQ history at the museum?
Great. Well, I'm not sure if Phoebe came along to Bucks Museum Pride events that we've had in the past. In 2018 was the first one. We had a couple of a drag king and a drag queen come along, and on that occasion we put out a big call for objects to be donated and stories to be told. And I have to say, wasn't sort of expecting huge numbers of people to turn up with things, but actually the first 5 people in the queue waiting to get in of the 50 that came all said, here, we've got a jacket, or we've got a lipstick, or we've got you know, this necklace that I gave my first girlfriend. And if anybody watched the brilliant webinar we did in February with my colleague Catherine here and Daniel Williams from the Buckinghamshire Archives, I told those stories and showed you those objects. I think that should still be on our website. We have changed our website since then, so hopefully it will be, but if not, I'm sure we can get you a link to that. And one of the very first objects was donated by a local artist, Emma Prill, and this is her LGB trees, which is an artwork that she created about her transgender experience. And it is now up in our new Discover Bucks art gallery, which we hope will be opening early in 2022. That's as much as I can tell you at the moment, folks. Do keep an eye on the website. We just can't wait to open and show this. But I have to say, it was the very first community object. And I know Emma was delighted that we were working with her and that a museum wanted to know about people's, you know, experiences and history. So it is great that that is in the contemporary art section. We've got some of the Buckinghamshire photos that we took earlier on this summer with Craig Easton, and there are LGBTQ people, including trans people, in those photos too, so that you can see again yourselves, as I said earlier. And we are still collecting objects and stories. We're talking with Martine Pringle very soon about collecting trans histories and a part of the Bucks Heroes project. And we're still very much out there collecting those objects and stories. So if you do have objects and stories, just as you've been hearing tonight about the huge importance of memory, Val McDermott actually said about Kate's book, that it was really important that this was a way of remembering the past and not forgetting, so we understood where we came from and are going to. Please do get in touch. The museum website has got a general email, just general email. If you email through to us, please do send us anything that you have, so that we can tell your story too.
Fantastic. Well, what a wonderful note to end the evening on. It just remains to me to say thank you, Kate, and thank you, Sue. I can't recommend Kate's book, Sensible Footwear, sorry, highly enough. I'm sure you can buy it in all good bookshops, I hope, or if not, online. And yeah, thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.